Welcome back to the Army of Me podcast. Today, I got a special friend and also a person that's also became a family friend over the past couple years, known as Rob Tierney. He's also a philosophy adjunct professor at the Houston campuses, and I think Houston downtown campus and also HCC teaches philosophy. I go into detail about his up and coming role in philosophy, why is philosophy important, philosophy in media, what his journey to philosophy, why should I care about philosophy, why should anyone care about philosophy, and basically, if I say philosophy again, I might puke. But I had a really good conversation with him. It was really, really interesting. Got to talk about the Matrix, as y'all know. It's my favorite, and I would love to so much. So I hope y'all really enjoy it, guys. Thank y'all for being here. Thank you for listening. Bye. Hey, Rob, how are you?
I'm doing okay, Patrick. How about you?
Doing all right, man. If you want to, can you introduce yourself real quick with your job title for me?
Okay, my name is Rob Tierney, and I teach philosophy. I'm an adjunct professor, so I teach part time, but at a couple of schools to kind of add up to full time. I teach at University of Houston downtown and at Houston Community College.
Nice, real nice. Um, Also, one thing I wanted to ask you was, as a geography major as me, where are you
Yeah,
today? Are you in Houston?
I'm in Houston. I'm gee, it's either Midtown or Montrose, kind of, or maybe kind of in the border between those two.
Okay, okay. Are you from Houston?
I am not. I'm from a little town called Monroe, Michigan, which
Oh,
is
you're in
right
Northie.
out. Yeah, yeah. I'm from a little town. I'm from the home of General George Custer, the Indian fighter, and Miss America in 19 something,
Uh,
80, and home of Lazy Boy chairs. Those are our three claims to fame. After
I love a lazy boy chair. It's my favorite memory going to my grandparents' house was having a lazy boy chair. So that's not a bad title. Is that North Michigan, South Michigan, or?
it's the very southeastern corner on Lake Erie, and just maybe 20 minutes north of Ohio. So it's like the Michigan Mitten. We're right sort of down in the southeastern corner.
Okay, okay. Um, what brought you to Houston then?
I came to Houston for the first time for graduate school in 1989, and at Rice, and
We got
I
that's a very good school. If anyone doesn't know.
I was not sure what I was going to do or what I wanted to do. I was a little disorganized back then, and so I applied to schools that were sort of the top and probably out of my range, and then I applied to some that maybe I should have been shooting higher. So it was kind of a mess. But anyway, I ended up applying to a bunch of them, and um, and then I got into Rice, so I was pretty disorganized, and I had paper all over my floor as whatever I was, and I thought, I'm probably supposed to get back and answer those schools about whether or not I'm going to go or what I'm going to accept an offer for. And I looked, and this was about a Wednesday, and the deadline was like that Friday. So I borrowed a friend's credit card, got a note that said, this guy can use my credit card. I don't think that's worth anything, but what the hell? And and I rented a car, and at first stop Virginia, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I got in the car, said, "What is the shortest line between Monroe and Virginia?" and just booked it. And it turns out I had no idea what, like those little lines were squiggly, backcountry roads with switchbacks and stuff. So, it's the middle of the night, and I'm flooring it trying to get. get anyway, I got there, got to see the campus, talk to them, called down to Houston. They said, "Don't worry, we'll give you a little bit more time. We'll fly you down here."
They
And
were gonna fly you down there.
yeah, a lot of times for grad school, it's really hard to go unless they give you funding, and they sometimes will take care of that kind of thing.
I
So
guess that
I got
makes
to come
sense
down.
because my girlfriend currently is going to grad school in Europe, and of course they're gonna help out with some of the finances for her to get over there, which makes sense. But I don't know. In the states, I never heard of that. I guess grad schools, but then again, I'm only working on my bachelor's, so
Yeah, a lot of times whether you get funding or not kind of determines it, because otherwise it can be so expensive.
yeah.
And
I
so
mean that
they
makes
they
sense.
do they do tend to have a lot more allocate funding for grad school in the way that they don't for undergrad. Yeah, so I flew down, and one of the reasons I applied to Rice was I wanted to get the heck out of those Michigan winters,
Yeah, it's hot
and I
down here. You got what you wanted.
yeah, I didn't know how hot.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Yeah.
Um, and and they treated me like a king. I had 4 years of funding and a tuition waiver, and they said, "Well, the bad news is Rice, the way it was set up, you we don't have teaching assistants really that teach, sort of the discussion section of courses. We might have you do some grading or something. So the bad news is we're going to give you all this money, but you won't be able to work for it." And I'm like, I can handle that. And so, so 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 I didn't know what I was doing, and I thought, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but you know what? These guys are going to pay me money to do what I want to most spend my time doing anyway, which is reading philosophy. So
So was
I'm
that
going to
your
Rice.
degree in graduate school was philosophy or was it law?
It was philosophy and undergrad, and then I got most of the way through a PhD program, and I thought I was going to get married to a woman who already had a kid. I thought, well, I'm going to have to get a job and make some money. So I went back to Michigan to go to law school, and thought I was going to. I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to Rice and finish the PhD. I'd done everything else. I'd written a really long master's thesis. I'd taken comprehensive exams already. I thought, write a few seminar papers in law school, slap them on the back of the old MA, and I got a PhD. But it didn't turn out that way. I ended up writing on a completely different topic while working as a lawyer, and finished it, and then worked as a lawyer of various kinds. Had my own specialized business at one point, and that tanked in the Great Recession. And I thought, what am I going to do? I was completely wiped out,
Yeah.
and somebody said, "Well, you could go teach. I know somebody that knows somebody at HCC," and I called down there and got an appointment like 2 days later with a guy who seemed to take a liking to me. And before you know it, I had some classes, and didn't expect I'd be doing this for this long, but it's been more than a decade now I've been teaching.
Nice, nice, nice.
So,
Um,
I missed the part where I came back down here after law school to do a clerkship in Beaumont,
uh,
met another Texas woman, jostled around a little bit, Michigan, Germany, came back to Texas to be with her, and that was the second Texas fiance that went down in flames. But anyway, I stayed in Houston, so so here I am.
it's interesting because like I feel like with law and philosophy, like law is very like straightforward and there's only like a set of rules that you can follow. And philosophy covers like pretty much everything, um, everything that involves ethics, logic, and the world, in my opinion. So I took a philosophy class at community college, and
Yeah,
our teacher had a lisp, and it was just really, really difficult to understand. I really enjoyed the class
yeah,
because for the first time in my life, I had no idea what was going on in the class. I like that feeling. That wasn't like because it wasn't math. I hate math, so like I never
yeah,
know what's going on in there. But like this was new, and he was like, "You're not supposed to understand it like on the first day. Like it's not gonna work that way." So
yeah,
like so he's like, "If I don't explain it right, you need to tell me so I can explain it better." And so we
yeah,
go through all the stories and stuff like that, or like the stories that go in our lessons in the books and stuff like that. I end up getting probably like I think a C plus in it. Wasn't my best work, but at community college with the philosophy professor teaching with a lisp,
yeah.
I'll take that grade. So
That could be very distracting. I
yeah.
mean, no disrespect to somebody with a speech impediment, but it can be distracting.
No, exactly. And then he did a really good job teaching the course as well, and his tests were straightforward. So I mean, I still overall gave him a really good rate my professor, but I'm curious to see where the line follows with coming into law and then philosophy because um like I said, seems to me very straightforward and like philosophy is like this very vague thing that a lot of people don't know about. So like is there similarities with law and philosophy? I'm sure there is, but can you go deeper to that?
Sure. Yeah, philosophy is one of the best majors for going to law school because you have to do, a lot of writing and a lot of reasoning, and it's particularly good prep to take the LSAT, the test that
Yeah.
the standardized test for going to law school to kind of see where you get admitted. I mean, you want to, take the special course and all that sort of thing before you do that. But you already have some pretty good skills, ideally under your belt, and that really helps. We do as a discipline really well. I think it's only the physics and math majors that beat us in LSATs. We do better at the business school. What is it? GMAT or whatever the heck it is, than the business students. We do. I think the only ones that I last time I looked at stats, the only one that does better on the LSATs are like math physics majors, which
It makes
and I'm
sense.
and I'm convinced that if they didn't group us together with the religious studies people, maybe because it's like philosophy and religious studies,
Yeah.
and I don't know about those people, but I think if we cut them loose, we do even better. But
Yeah.
so so so,
Makes sense.
but but uh, but no, and it kind of depends where you go to law school. Like if you go to, okay, this is going to sound super snobby, but if you go to what they would call a local law school, or at least what they would call it in my school that I went to, you're going to learn what pretty much like what they call black letter law. Like here's the law of your jurisdiction. You kind of have to know it, and this is going to get you ready for the bar exam. And Michigan is, again, I'm going to sound snobby, but it's a top law school, and people are going all over the country. Primarily, they're going to start in New York or DC,
Yeah.
and so you're not really concerned about learning the law of Michigan. It's
Yeah, it
just
makes sense.
yeah. So there's a lot of chance to kind
You're
of
very
study.
social awareness, very social aware of your surroundings when you're in law school, I guess, if you're where you are geographically wise.
Yeah, yeah. But I had friends from all over the place, and we did a lot of theory and policy. It dovetailed really nicely with philosophy, and I brought those skills together in my legal work. It gave me some advantages that I think other folks don't have, and that fit into my clerkship and what I did to start my own business. But I loved law school. It was competitive. I mean, it was different from. Um, One of the things that was different is sort of in philosophy. It's like a lot of things. Everybody wants to be the smartest kid on the block,
Yeah.
but you're all kind of doing different things, and you're sort of kind of trying to be polite about it, but really it's a thing. And but in law school it's sort of like we're all in competition. There's just no kidding about it, and you'll start out taking the same classes, and you're going to be ranked in your class, and half of you are going to be in the bottom half of the class, and it's pretty straightforward. And I really, it was a difficult time, but I really liked it, and I made some good friends, and I really thought it was great. And I really, my hope, my fondest ambition was to bring philosophy and law together. And aside from bringing, teaching a little philosophy of law and bringing it, I haven't been able to do that yet. My dream job would be teaching in a law school, but I don't think that's going to happen, because those are really hard to get.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Uh, but it's a really cool combination. I try to bring them together in some teaching and some projects and stuff.
Well, that's good. One other question I wanted to ask you was, did you always know you wanted to get a degree in philosophy? Like, because I feel like not a lot of people even know. Well, first of all, can you please go into detail what philosophy is to like for like your intro classes? Like, what do you say what philosophy is to like first time students who are taking philosophy class?
That is a tough one because that itself is a philosophical dispute.
Yeah, I bet.
But it's worth it. So, and that tells you something about it right there. But I've tried to do various. I will say something about it, but I'm going to preface it by saying I've tried to do that at various points, and to some extent, you just have to jump into the game, and then you start to get a sense of what it is. Um, but I try. My kind of take on it is. In the beginning, kind of going back to the ancient Greeks, philosophy was really indistinguishable from science. And what's happened over time is the two have separated more and more. All the way into the 19th century, people who teach what we would now call physics still call themselves natural philosophers. And the distinction was probably already there, even though the language wasn't. And we can kind of go back and read that distinction into it. But the further you go back, and you don't have to go back all that far, there really isn't a distinction. But what happened is the sciences kind of broke off, and got established, especially strongly in the 1600s. And kind of the distinction is if you can figure out a regular method for dealing with problems in the discipline, either through observation or calculation or some combination of the two, and you can, kind of teach your graduate students and they can continue on in a research program, you're probably doing science.
Mm,
If you can't do that, you might be doing philosophy. So you're trying to figure things out, and really all you have is your native wit. So you're really concerned about analyzing concepts to know what they mean, to make sure you literally know what you're talking about, and making rational arguments. And those concern a lot of different things. There's a huge topic of ethics and political philosophy, but then there's also least traditionally, metaphysics, thinking about the ultimate constituents of the universe, maybe in a different way than physics. So you might be think, well, physics is studying material objects. Are there immaterial objects? Are there such
Yeah.
things as souls or God or so? And then you can ask really weird question like, what are numbers? They're not physical things. Are they some kind of non-physical things? So you can do that. And then there's epistemology, which is what do we know and how can we know it? Can we really know anything? Those kind
Yeah.
of questions.
That was my
So there's
biggest takeaway from philosophy was like the stuff that like I can't. You just said it, but it's like it's not there. We can't see it, but it's there, and it revolves the world around it, like stuff like that in philosophy, which I thought was really interesting. That wasn't part of religion, because I'm
right.
growing up in like, especially in the South, in religion, it's like, well, we have all these immaterial things that aren't really there. We can't see them, but we have faith in them, and we don't like, we believe in them, you know. And philosophy was like, it's there, and it's gonna be there, and we just can't see it, but it interacts with us every day of our lives. And I was like, okay, this is really cool because, for one, it's not a monotheistic being that's saying, oh, I need you, this is there and this is why. But I do think religion helps people understand that in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. Um, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different views on that, and on God or something like that. But in philosophy, at least in the kind that I think is worth doing, you have to try to demonstrate that as best you can by reasoning. So there are these famous arguments, trying to prove the existence of God, or there are a couple trying to disprove the existence of God, and they're kind of like styles of that where somebody will revamp it so they kind of reappear over the centuries in different guises. And so there's philosophy of religion, but that's different from, like you're saying, different from theology, where you kind of start out with, well, these are the things we believe, what sense can we make of that, or how can we put them together systematically? So in a philosophy class, you might, say, well, what reasons are there to think that there is or isn't a God, and try to come up with arguments for that. Whereas in theologies, if you're doing that, or religious studies, it's more like, well, there is a God. Now, what do we want to say about
Yeah.
that? So it's kind of a different thing. And that, but I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but
Yeah.
um, yeah. Um,
So getting up to teaching philosophy, how did you? That was the original question that I went off on a tangent about what is philosophy, but what made you decide to go into the path of philosophy, and then what, like, because when you ask an 18-year-old, what do they want to do with their life, they're like, I want to teach philosophy. You don't really hear that a lot.
right, right.
So I mean, like, was it something you wanted to do all the way like straightforward, or like something you just walked into? You're like, okay, I really, really enjoy this.
Well, I might have had a sort of a bent for it without knowing that there was such a thing when I was pretty young. So can I tell you a couple of stories?
Go for it, please.
Okay. Okay. So when I was, this is something that only like looking back later on kind of saw the significance of. So when I was really, I'm thinking it might have been like fifth grade. And we got some test or some homework assignment about how it was either how the muscles work, or I think it was like how do how do the muscles work, what causes what they do. And my mom was a nurse, and we had some medical books, and
Mm-hmm.
of course at that age I thought my mom knew everything,
Yeah.
being a nurse. And she must have books about everything. So I looked and looked, and it was like, well, the muscles expand and contract. Well, what causes that? Well, there are these signals sent through the nerves. What causes that? Well, you go to the brain. And I looked in there and I thought, okay, but where's the whole thing that makes that go? Because I decide to move my arm, and that's what causes my arm to move. I don't see that in here. And I kept looking for more explanation, but of course you're not going to get that in a medical book. And so, years later, you look back and say, those are two really different and maybe incompatible explanatory schemes, where we explain what people do on the one hand by talking about, say, electrons firing in the brain, in a very different kind of explanation where we talk about what people are doing because they made a decision or they have an intention. Those are not really, on most views, physical things. We don't want to say that they're a special ghostly non-physical thing, or at least most people don't
Yeah.
today. But you have these two really incompatible frame, and that, of course, that comes out in law too. Do you want to say, well, that person couldn't help doing the crime because of their brain chemistry, or do you want to talk, as the prosecutor is going to want to talk? Well, they had a plan, they made a decision, and so on. But anyway, I was looking, in a sense, for an answer in the book that the life sciences just don't give us.
Yeah,
They
they
don't
don't give
speak
you
that
that.
discourse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was a sort of a philosophical question that I didn't even know was, or what philosophy was. So how I got into it more immediately was when I was probably 15. I was having a really hard time, and I'd always kind of wondered about how the world worked, and I sort of thought I could find answers in poetry and literature and stuff. And I went to Catholic school for 12 years, so I think I
Oh,
was in a
really? So
sophomore.
did
Yeah,
you grow up Catholic?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I grew up in the Episcopal Church. If anyone doesn't know, it's like basically the Diet Coke version of Catholic. So like we like we're still doing Lent, no meat on Fridays, stuff like that. So I mean,
Yeah.
I can't relate to Catholics, but I somewhat can, if that makes sense.
Oh no, I get you. You guys, yeah, it is. Maybe so slightly sort of happier and more open.
Yeah,
um,
it's not a us against the world kind of a motto, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well. So one thing that came out of that was, so I'm stumbling through with my confusion and stuff, and I don't know how I came to this, but I started thinking about what we're responsible for and how the world worked and how we could do it. And I somehow or other stumbled into this free will determinism debate, which is, on the one hand, are we like any other object in nature that science can explain? Like, a stone rolls down a hill, you don't say it should have gone down a different path. Given the laws of nature and the initial conditions, that's the only way it could happen. And you don't blame the stone if it rolls down the hill and hits you. Well, science talks about human beings in exactly the same way. And that seemed incompatible with holding people responsible and punishing them. And of course, in Catholicism, there's this idea, as in, kind of our everyday language and in a lot of religions, where we have the power to make a choice and so as if that somehow rides free of the laws of nature, and so we can be held responsible, we can be punished. And of course, you're Catholic, you're thinking about eternal damnation. That's a pretty harsh punishment. So I was just worried about this, and somehow I stumbled into that, and I started really intensively reading some pretty tough stuff about that, and I thought, this is the shit, man.
Yeah.
And it was some really close, rigorous reasoning, and that just clicked for me. And I just loved it because I thought, this is, I'm looking for some way to get hold of these things. And at that point, I thought I was going to find answers in a way that I, don't think I could now. But I thought, if we're just super rigorous, we're going to get to those answers. And then I don't know how this came in there, but then I started reading a lot of kind of existentialist stuff too. So I had these weird, two very different things going on, but that's how I got into it and started arguing. We had to take some version of a religious course every year, and I started becoming more and more of a pain in the butt to my instructors there.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, and yeah, and I went to college thinking I was going to be. Oh, I was reading all this existentialist stuff, and I was reading existential psychology, and I was going to be an existential psychotherapist, I thought. And I took one course in my first year of college in psychology, and it was research psychology, kind of like more behaviorism stuff that I didn't really appreciate at the time. And I took a philosophy class, and I was trying to, like, what will get the deepest. And I ended up, I switched. I went with philosophy, and I took a second philosophy course, and I had been I'd done pretty well in school, but I wasn't always. I had some discipline issues, let's say, from the get go, and but some kind of switch flipped in my first year of college. And I mean, I was always a reader, but I was not big on following anybody's instructions.
Yeah.
And something flipped there, and I got really competitive about it. I started doing well, and I was at Michigan State, which is a fine school, but it's not a super competitive national school. And in my second year, I went to University of Michigan, and I just went, pretty nuts with it as an undergrad. I was just, obsessed. I just totally dove in, sort of officially to the philosophy thing. And once it, for a lot of folks, once you pick up that bug, it's, you can't put it down. Um, and it's almost like you can't not do
Like
it
like
because
like you found like the holy grail for yourself. It sounds like.
yeah, I mean it
You
was
found everything you were looking for. Like this is it. This is all I'm. This is where I'm supposed to be in a philosophical way, right? That this is where you're
yeah.
supposed to be, and this is the path I was supposed to follow, which is really really cool because not a lot of people could say that about their life, which is really really interesting.
I guess I don't think now that it's the kind of for a whole variety of simple and difficult reasons. I don't think it's the kind of like when I first started out, I thought I would find the answers. And I don't think it's quite like that now. Although I think I found maybe some better ways to think about things, and maybe here and there some answers. But you get into it and you think this is just awesome, and you can you can get I feel very puzzled about things, even ordinary things, and this helps me make a little bit more sense of them. And yeah, and it's like you I will never be bored. As long as my brain works, I will never ever be bored. There's always going to be something more to dive into. And it's like, I wish I had 10 lives to read this stuff. There's just so much good. And then, it's kind of one bit of is sort of in conversation with another bit. And it's just, yeah, it's this whole world that opens up. It's wonderful.
That's great. I'm gonna tell you about a book I just read. I actually read it about maybe a year ago, but it's the last philosophy book I read, and it
Okay.
was called The Matrix. Sorry, The Philosophy of the Matrix.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
anyone who knows me, I'm a big sci-fi, fantasy, horror fan,
I
and
I
I
I was just gonna say I looked at your podcast website and somebody had written in the comments, these guys really like the Matrix. So
yes, we do. That was like one of the first episodes I did with my best friend, who's also my roommate, who's also an artist. But that's like our main, like most of our money goes to Matrix collectibles. I have multiple comics, action figures, DVDs, Blu-rays, the VHS tapes. Like we collect it all. Like we're very very into it. But the book was about. Also I got the book for collector reasons, but also I read the book when I was traveling the first time I saw my girlfriend. We do long distance, but
yeah.
I was reading this in the airport in Chicago, and like it blew my mind because it was basically relating to the movie how the movie represents like philosophical stories of like Socrates and all those guys. I mean, I can't remember all their names, but it was basically talk. I wanted you to explain the story. I'm sure you've heard of it 1,000 times, but it's basically where they're all in a cave, and do you know what I'm talking about? And like there's a light.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
yeah,
like basically it was one of the parts in the movie where something happened where like basically I think it was where he woke up and then everyone thought he was
yeah.
weird, and then like he wakes up from the Matrix, but it's also it related to the story of Socrates. Was it Socrates? Am I saying that wrong or
Socrates.
Socrates? I apologize.
All
I
right.
butchered that hard, but um
Well, that's kind of how it's spelled. It looks like Socrates, and there are some of these names where I've never heard them said. I've
really.
only read them, and so then you go. So like if you end up like giving a talk somewhere or something, it's like, oh, I don't really know how to pronounce this dude's name or something. So yeah.
But anyway,
But
I wanted to talk
yeah,
to you, or if you can explain the story to me again. It was basically about them in a cave. One finds the light, and then everyone calls him weird and dysfunctional. And basically, he gets out of the cave, and then once they're so scared they can't leave the cave because they're so used to their surroundings from living in the cave.
yeah, and oh boy, this is gonna. I'm probably not going to do a great job with this, but I do remember the story. Here's how I remember it. Plato thinks that ordinary life, for us without philosophy, um, it's like we're in a cave, and as I recall, it was something like this: like we're sitting there uh, on something or other, yeah, a bench or something in the cave, and I think we might be each of us chained down. I'm not
Yes,
sure.
yes, I remember that.
And
We're chained down. That's right.
yeah, and it's as if there's a light shining from behind us, casting shadows on the wall. And we look at the shadows and think that that's the real world, the way things really are. But according to Plato, so I should say, so Socrates didn't write anything down, but his teacher was Socrates taught Plato. So
Yes, I remember
Plato,
that. I remember that
so
part of my philosophy course as well.
so when I say Plato, we're still kind of talking about Socrates, and so probably a lot of stuff Plato wrote down, Socrates did say, but then later on, Plato wrote all this kind of stuff, and it was like Socrates was just sort of a device, a sort of a make believe. But anyway, so somehow through philosophy, you're able to. I don't know, get out of the chains and you leave the cave. And of course, it's very, you talked about it being a little bit difficult when you first get into philosophy. If I remember correctly, when the guy gets out of the cave and goes into the sun for the first time, it's sort of very
Yeah, it's
confusing and
scary.
overwhelming.
It was very.
Yeah.
I remember reading it. He was terrified almost. Like it was scary. He's like, "What is this? What is this being in the sky? It's bright and scary, and like, what am I supposed to do?" And it's more. I think from what I got out of it, it was more like, "Why don't we go back to the cave where I feel more comfortable instead of embracing this new feeling that I have?"
Yeah, and kind of picking up, I think I'm being reminded of something by what you said, where uh, then the guy goes back down in the cave, and if I remember correctly, and I'm riffing off something you said because I think this is right. Um, he goes back down and tries to tell him, "Look, this is
Yes.
what I saw. There's this other world." And they're like, "What are you talking about? That's crazy talk. This is the real thing right here in front of us." And I think that's about as much of it as I remember. I guess maybe the real philosopher then learns how to stay out in the light.
Yeah, but
And play.
basically what they were relating it to, if anyone's seen The Matrix, of course, it's Neo, who's Keanu Reeves, and he's like, there's this whole new world that I'm getting into, and I can't tell anyone about it because no one's understanding it. And like that, and once they hit those two parallels together, like it blew my mind because I never even thought of it that way. And
Yeah,
like, I'm sure you know this in media or in music or on I mean anywhere with media, there's some sort of philosophical reasoning to it or way that it's worded or way that it's existing is from philosophical language, I believe. And to me, I was like, had no idea. And of course, me being a sci-fi fan with like a philosophical study colliding, I was like, this is the
yeah.
coolest book I've ever read. If you want to, next time I see you, I'll let you read it or let you take a look at it.
It's philosophy of the Matrix?
Philosophy of the Matrix, yes.
I'll take a look around online and have a look at it. The and I brought up the Matrix, over many years. Brought it up
Really?
in my class in a little bit of a different context.
Tell me the
So
context then.
I don't know if you had a chance to read Descartes, but
It sounds
so
familiar,
Descartes
but I
was
have not read it though.
he was a guy. He was living in the 1600s, and he was a sort of a philosopher scientist. He invented analytic geometry, like where you have the x-y axis and you graph the curve and all that crap. He figured out a way to bring math and geometry together in a way that hadn't been before. So pretty bright guy. So he's writing about science, but he was worried. This was the scientific revolution. He's looking around him. People have very different ideas of scientific method, and he thought, well, we got to find the right method, and we have to find an ultimate foundation for this new knowledge in the sciences, because all this stuff is great, but if we don't have a good foundation, if we don't figure out what it is about all this that's really working, we could stumble into another sort of bad period, or so he comes up with this method, which is, I'm going to doubt, kind of set aside as potentially false anything that I can find that might even possibly, by for any conceivable reason, be false. And what I'll be left over with, if anything, is what couldn't possibly or conceivably be false, which is to say only that if there is anything which is absolutely certain. So the way he tries to say, well, what might be false? What should I set aside as not absolutely certain? And the way he does this is he kind of tells a story. He kind of has these, when I hallucinate or somebody hallucinates or sees a mirage, they think that something that's there that isn't. So maybe my senses, and then deceive me. And he says, well, that's only a special circumstance. Da, da, da. Well, but when I go to sleep every night, I'm in dreams, and when I'm in the dream seems real.
Hmm.
And then he kind of gets deeper and deeper into this, and then ultimately he brings up what's sometimes called the evil deceiver, the evil demon, the demigod, and the demigod can not only be like when you're in a dream, but not with this, maybe this evil deceiver just kind of puts, sort of say, like, transmits the thoughts to my mind. So maybe I don't even have a body. Maybe there's no body at all, because it would look exactly the same to me. I could imagine this happening. So it's what philosophers call logically possible. And it would look the same to me, just like in a dream. When I'm in a dream, most, at least sometimes we don't say, well, I'm dreaming. This isn't real. I don't need to run from this grizzly bear. It's just a a dream grizzly bear. It looks real, but yet you're not in Alaska. There is no grizzly bear. So there's this idea that I could be wrong about all that, and even be confused about ultimately with this. He says even the truth of mathematics. So when I'm talking to my students about this, one of the things that I use to kind of walk them down that path, or that I have used, is to say, it could be like the Matrix. You'd say it would look, think of that in that movie. It looks real. You don't say, well, you could say, well, maybe this isn't real. I hit on my desk. No, everything it's solid. I hear the noise. This is, but it could be, it's imaginable that it's your first stop is to say your brain could concoct it just like in a dream.
Yeah,
So I kind of give them that analogy, or there's another version of it for a more materialist age where, how do you know that you're not a brain in a vat? And, and there are evil neuroscientists giving little electrical charges to your brain, so you think you're in Houston listening to a philosophy lecture,
that's right.
but you're just there. And so the Matrix comes up there, but Patrick, a lot of the younger students, I think it's like that's old news for them. So I've tried,
Oh man,
like, some of them haven't seen it, so I try to use, what is it, Inception a
I
little bit.
love Inception too. We have that movie on Blu-ray regularly and all the sorts of stuff. We're definitely movie collectors in my house, but
Oh yeah,
we just got that on Blu-ray and I can't wait to watch it on Blu-ray. It's a very very good movie.
yeah. Well, and since you're such a sci-fi fan, do you ever read any Philip K. Dick?
Actually, I'm pretty sure I have literally one of his books sitting right next to me. Hold on, give me 1 second. Yeah, I'm reading The Man in the High Castle right now.
Okay. Yeah, that I don't know if that comes out in that book, but for a lot of his stuff, and a lot of the stuff they've made movies of his stuff, like Total Recall and some other ones, there's a very prevalent theme in his work about maybe I'm not really me. How do I know? Maybe I'm an android. Maybe you're an android. Maybe all this isn't what it seems. And it's that kind of extreme hyperbolic doubt, and perhaps the impossibility of getting out of that, that seems to be, like, even in uh, in Blade Runner. Now that's significantly different from the book,
Very
and
good
it's been a
movie
long,
though.
but a very good movie. And it's been a long time since I read the book. But in there, I think the way the story is told, at least sometimes, um, you at the end begin to think, maybe Decker is a replicant. It's just unclear. So you've got this guy who's hunting replicants, and he's the hero of the story, and he's running around trying to figure out who is a replicant. And then at the end, maybe he is one of these new models that, it just like one of the replicant that he maybe ran off with. Was Sean, somebody devastatingly beautiful. I forget her name. And because she didn't know she was a replicant, right? She
Yeah.
thought she was human. She had implanted memories. Implanted memories are a big part of the Philip K. Dick stuff. But it's in some sense.
I think your mic cut out, Rob. Rob, can you hear me? I think your mic cut out mid conversation.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I was kind of getting animated about Philip K. Dick, and I
No,
swiveled
it's
around in my
okay.
chair.
You're
I
okay.
swiveled around in my chair and pulled my wire there a little bit. But okay. But anyway, so where does that leave us? I forgot.
You were talking about the girl who's very beautiful in Blade Runner and
Oh,
how something.
oh, she doesn't know she's a replicant. She's
Yes.
got implanted memories, and that's another big Philip K. Dick theme, which I think, and we have, if everything that all your brain functioning, or excuse me, all your conscious states are arise from brain functioning, then in some sense that's in principle possible, we think. Maybe not, but anyway, that's something that Philip K. Dick plays around with a lot.
Mhm.
um, so uh, and he was, well, he got pretty weird, and thought that there was a supernatural being speaking to him through, I think it was a pink light. He had some issues. Anyway, so
Oh yeah. No, yeah, this
so,
book that I'm reading now of his, it's basically about if in World War II if the Japanese and Germany took over America. But like
yeah, yeah,
there's not like a Nazi feel to it at all, which is weird. But
yeah,
it's still very cool because like I think the main character is like basically he works for a guy Asian or Japanese, and basically he's like kind of like a lower class citizen compared to him, and it's like kind of these cool contrasting. It's like a sci-fi history book in a way.
Yeah,
I still haven't finished it. I've been reading a bunch of other stuff right now, and it's when I'm about near or I get like at least 4 chapters, and I'm like, what other book can I read? I just get very
I
bored
do.
easily.
I've done that so much, and the books pile up, and then it's like, why don't I finish one of these?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another question I wanted to ask was why. I mean, this is such a broad question, but why is philosophy important? I guess to you and in general, if you could sum it up in the best way possible, why is philosophy important?
Well, it's in a sense important to me because I can't stop doing it, and because it's fascinating, because it helps me make sense of the world, in some ways at least. And when I don't do it, I feel that confusion, and need to sort of make a little bit more progress. Um, it's Why should somebody else be interested in it? And I've really had mixed feelings about whether whether I want my students. There have been points where I thought I don't even want them to go down this road, but there are a few reasons. Some of them are very practical. So one of the most practical ways is if you're looking to go to grad school, this will really help you get a good score on that standardized test that you're going to take.
Hmm.
So that's the most sort of crass reason. Another reason is depending on what you do, if you take some good rigorous philosophy, maybe take some logic as a part of that. Um, it really helps with being a sort of a rigorous thinker, and that can pay off all over the place in all areas of life in your job, especially as we move more and more. We're all going to be most of us, just about everybody, is going to be to some extent a knowledge worker, and it really helps to have that analytical skill. I know it's definitely helped me as a lawyer and a consultant. I worry sometimes about, students are coming out and they're not really able to think about things they've been taught to the test, the standardized tests of kind of basic knowledge, multiple choice, before they get to college, and really aren't picking up any critical thinking in college. And we've been talking we go to all this, sort of education pedagogy kind of stuff, and they talk gotta have critical thinking, but it doesn't really happen. And a lot of the places where they want it to happen are not, the folks in that department are not really equipped for it. It's very difficult to do. Sometimes students resist, but it's a very good thing. And if you do philosophy, you're sort of forced to. And so you get the critical thinking, and then it just sort of opens up this world. So there's this practical. It's good for standardized tests. A little bit more removed from that, it will help you in almost anything you do as far as being able to sort of reason through things and try to come up with solutions. And then it's just this fascinating world, and it might help you. It's tough because it's a long, hard road, and you a lot of times don't feel like you reach final resolution, but can at least help sift through sort of the more and less plausible, the better and worse answers, and you might find some that you think are at least for your purposes the most convincing about really almost any kind of fundamental question. I mean, if you and I were talking and you said, I don't know, let's just say you took the position that there needed to be more progressive taxation, so there'd be greater kind of, that could go be plowed back redistributively, so we'd have more um, socioeconomic equality. And I said, well, that's taking away people's money that they earned, and started talking about, property rights and liberty. Well, it's we just know economically there's a trade-off between that kind of economic liberty or property rights liberty and social equality. You can't expand one without contracting the other. And so to figure out we're my to say, well, why is one more important than the other? How should we balance them? We're doing political philosophy. Or if you say, that law is unfair, well, what do you mean? Again, we might be in political philosophy or ethics, or people want to talk about God. What do you want to just tell me what you read in a book and you accept that? Okay, but do you want to reason about it? Does it make sense? Can we prove it? There's a long history of thinking about what the nature of God would be like. If you, I had some. My roommate was doing another podcast, and she was co-hosting one for a while, and they had somebody in who a couple who were ghost hunters, and so she was, playing the philosophical wet blanket. How exactly is your ghost detection apparatus so it works? She asked them, what is it detecting actually? And so if you're thinking about things like, you know, what sorts of things exist in the world, maybe doing some philosophy of science, it kind of prepares you to think about, those kind of things, what counts as a good explanation. um, Almost anything that you find interesting, if you want to go beyond saying, here's what I already think
Hmm.
without giving any reasons, um, I think that it's very easy, you get into sort of philosophical waters very quickly. So if you and I just wanted to talk about, what do you want from the grocery store? And that chick is really hot. I mean, that's good stuff. But almost any other thing that you talk about, there's a philosophical issue lurking there. Now we can't all stop. We need, you know, uh, 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 doctors and lawyers and geographers, and thank heaven we've got all that and people doing different things. But if you want to go down that road, if you feel compelled, or if you want to know more, it's this sort of whole world of that open for you, and people who are absolutely thrilled to talk about it, and you can really get lost in it. I mean, I one problem I have is different places I've lived over the years is sort of not really keeping them up. But part of that is it's like, well, let's see, I could commune with the greatest minds ever, reading some more of like of one of my favorites, Wittgenstein, or I could go mow the lawn. Well, I know which one is going to is going to
Yeah.
win that contest. So it's just it opens up this wonderful world where and one thing builds on another. So it's from the very practical all the way to this, I think, sort of life enriching. And I think we need more of that, of the critical thinking and realizing some of the possibilities, particularly given what's going on politically today. And so I've really changed my curriculum in some ways to kind of respond to what's going on now politically,
No, you
and
should. Absolutely.
and and then the thing that's kind of feeding into it, this sort of, I believe it more or less because it feels true to me, or because of, this particular propaganda machine that I'm plugged into. This is what me and my tribe believe. And you can't really run a democracy, can't survive on that. And so I teach my students about what's called epistemic responsibility, which is the responsibility to base your beliefs on rational justifications. That there's an ethical responsibility there for good reasons and evidence. Then we talk a little bit about what that is, because philosophy. I mean, some things like, well, if it's a scientific question, you have to learn science. It's not like philosophy has, but there are some things you can learn there about rational arguments. And then I make, put a little bit of we study cognitive biases, something we can learn about from psychology. We look at techniques of disinformation and propaganda, so it becomes more interdisciplinary, but I put it under this sort of ethical rubric and some of the philosophical ideas about rational justification. And the other thing I started doing is teaching about different concepts of liberty, because I think we
Hmm.
have kind of an impoverished political discourse, and where one kind of idea of liberty has squeezed out the others. And there's another interesting concept and tradition of liberty, one which was shared among the founding fathers of this country but has been totally pushed out. So we talk about that. So I've really I always kind of taught the class, kind of teaching the classics, and I sort of my view, teaching the texts, and we look at the arguments. What I believe is not important, and I still not, I still don't, obviously I don't test the students. Do you believe what I believe, or something like that? But it has gotten a little bit more pointed at issues, and it's pretty clear what some of my views are. I mean, there are some things where you just like, I can't say there are two equal sides to this debate. That's just, I can't honestly do that. And if this is a problem, we have a problem with this, and here's
Yeah.
some reasons why. So I maybe went on a little too long with
No,
that,
you're
but
fine. You're fine.
um, and so for me, it's like some of that is really, it's hard to teach. And I had some assignments that students didn't like, but it's like, how can I not teach that now? The world has become, in some ways, much more terrifying, at least politically. And I worry, like my students. I mean, I am old, I guess. My students, they're coming up in a world where they think this is normal. Um, and I've been at for years. I've been thinking like, oh my God, they think this is normal even before the last 4 years. But it's gotten more and more bizarre. And and it's very extremely distressing.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'm sure you see that stuff every day teaching and stuff like that. But another thing I wanted to end on was your HEC Learning Web. If you go to your
Yeah.
resources, it says interesting stuff, philosophy, audio, video, excellent philosophy podcast. So I'm guessing you're a podcast fan.
I used to listen to a ton of podcasts, and so I haven't kept up the learning web in a long time. That's sort of like there's some things we have to put there like our resume and stuff,
Yeah.
but we use some other platforms mostly now. That's like this old, but anyway, yeah. So there are a few good philosophy podcasts that I like. I have friends who listen to a lot of other ones, but I just have if you're going to ask me which ones I like, is
Yeah,
that
yeah. That was definitely the
um,
question.
there are two in particular that I think are really well. There's three, but the third one's going to be too boring. So the one that runs uh like well, I can think of four. Sorry, for there's one that's called I think it's called Philosophy Bytes,
Yeah.
and those tend to run about like 15 minutes. And my given my prior prejudices, I'd be like, oh, it can't be serious, but they're actually really good and very accessible. There's another one that I think they're still doing out of the University of Chicago. It's called, or at least it was, it's called Elucidations.
Mhm.
And those usually run about a half an hour. Now, those are maybe a little bit more geared toward people with knowledge of philosophy, but I think it can be followed. And if you listen to a couple, you kind of get what's going on. And I think that's really good. And there are two others. One is, would be I think too boring for most listeners, and that's philosophy books, and it's like an hour of talking about some new philosophy book. I like it, probably too boring. But there's another one that might be interesting and accessible for somebody with patience. There's this guy who's done this incredible thing. Years ago, he started this podcast called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. And he said, I'm going to go back to the beginnings of at least Western philosophy, and I'm going to go through it bit by bit. And so he has these segments that's been going on for years that are wonderful. Occasionally he'll have a guest expert, and he's kind of expanded. He's got a thing now, Indian philosophy without any gaps, and he's got some other traditions going too. But just there's this tremendous archive, and if you want to go back, and you're like, who the heck was Plotinus? What was that all about? You can find some really even more obscure than Plotinus guys and really interesting debates. And of course, sometimes you find is like these guys were arguing about stuff that we still maybe in a somewhat different way, but we still worry about today. So that's really good. I got to mention one more, Patrick.
You go for it.
Uh, this is BBC, and it's a radio show, but they do the podcast, and that's called oh in Our Time, I think it's called. Melvin Bragg is the host, and they do all kinds of different topics, but they do philosophical topics sometimes, and you can filter on the BBC website for philosophy, and those are very accessible. What they do, they've got a pretty good host who's always up on what he's talking about, and he'll have like three guests who are very knowledgeable, and they'll have a discussion, and that's really accessible and good, and it's kind of yeah, that's a really good one too. So those would be my choices. There's some other ones, the Partially Examined Life that people like, kind of three dudes who started out in philosophy and then went and did something else, and they kind of have these long discussions. I'm not so into it, but other people might like it. But that's kind of there are other ones too, but those are my favorites. I would say if you really, maybe start out with elucidations because I think there's like I appreciate that. I mean, it's like I'm not like, "Ah, that's fluff." It's like, no, it's good, but it's only 15 minutes long and it's pretty accessible. So if you're like, I don't want to listen to these some academic talk about some book I'll never read for an hour, like in philosophy books, which I like. I get that, but this is like you can dig in right away. It's usually a very interesting issue. So yeah, I recommend those.
Nice. One that's really, really popular I've listened to a couple of times is called Philosophy This. And it's
Oh,
like it's the same thing. It's like 15 to 20 minutes long. Super straightforward, and it's done really, really well. I have listened to them in a really long time. But I mean, that's the only philosophy podcast I know of. But these are definitely good recommendations as well. But I think that's all the time we have today, Rob. And I really appreciate you being here, and I really appreciate you sharing your story about philosophy and why philosophy is important, and why should anyone care about philosophy. And if you have any, and I'm sure stuff for this stuff like sorry for this stuff like for you is probably like the holy messiah, like I said earlier. But And I'm just glad that you got to be able to talk with us today.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
All right, I really appreciate it, Rob. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye bye.